So with the Nintendo Switch 1 being around for well over 8 years now, in recent memory, system updates have not really been that impactful to the core user experience or functionality. It is typically general system stability in terms of the detailed notes that we have to go through from Nintendo on what they changed. However, we now have the biggest Nintendo Switch system update in recent memory with 20.0.0 and some huge changes specifically impacting how your Nintendo Switch functions in the Switch 2 world, and some very important features that you're going to want to be aware of, whether or not you are somebody who might be trading in your Switch for a Switch 2, or you want to participate with the new Game Share feature that now has a dedicated icon on your Switch home screen. If you've updated, you've probably noticed. You want to know how that works walking into it, because you can still use your Switch 1 with a Switch 2 for select games, and virtual game cards are a big step forward for how Nintendo is planning on sharing games with friends and family. And while not perfect and just as easy as handing them a physical game card to play, there are definitely some upsides to this, in addition to maybe some potential downsides depending on how you look at things, and some functionality that we did not have clarification on in terms of, can you still play your digital games on your non-primary console if you're signed in with that Nintendo account? And Nintendo's outlined and answered all of those questions for us. So we're gonna get on the same page with all of those details. Before we do, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on your bell notification to join Sunbro Nation if you're new here, and make sure you do subscribe, because you will be entered in just for subscribing to a giveaway for a Nintendo Switch 2 that we will be revealing the winner of after we cross that 90,000 subscriber mark on the channel. So with that, I want to first kick it off right over at Nintendo's official support website so we can read through the cliff notes of all of these updates. And I am filming this relatively soon after this update dropped, so we may make updated mentions of this in the future if some data mine information is revealed and things like that. But for the most part, I want to firstly read through the high-level overview of everything that has changed, and then we really have to dive into some specifics like the virtual game card guide that Nintendo has outlined, because it should be simple, but it's not exactly simple, and we'll hopefully break it all down and give you some understanding by the end of the video. But the following icons for new features have been added to the home menu. Virtual game cards, that is one new icon you will notice on your Nintendo Switch home menu. Purchase Nintendo Switch digital software DLC and some free software are now virtual game cards and displayed in this list menu. You can virtually load and eject virtual game cards between up to 2 Nintendo Switch systems. Virtual game cards can be lent to others in the same Nintendo account family group. For more information, see the virtual game card guide, which we will be doing, but first, continuing on down, Game Share compatible software can be shared from a Nintendo Switch 2 system to other nearby systems to play together. So this is that local wireless play we've seen Nintendo kind of market. It's basically a way to keep the Switch 1 relevant for even some Switch 2 games that you can just stream to them. So you can play together via local wireless, and the Nintendo Switch 2 system must initiate the game share. So even though you have this icon in your system right now, you can look for a game share session going on, but because nobody has a Switch 2, unless if you know somebody with a Switch 2, in which case let me know. But yes, this is something you cannot use yet. This feature cannot be used between 2 Nintendo Switch and Switch OLED models and or Switch Lite systems. So basically, this is a Switch 2 to Switch 1 feature specifically. It is not something that you could actually go ahead and do Switch to Switch in its current form. This is specifically for Switch 2 to Switch 1 communication. User verification settings has been added under user and user settings. You can restrict access to virtual game card menu by requiring entry of a PIN or signing into your Nintendo account. So AKA lock it behind some parental controls, or if you don't want everybody having access to lend out your games, that is something, and we'll break down how long they stay lent out and when they come back to you and stuff like that, but you can lock that behind a PIN. Online license settings have been added. When turned on, you can play downloaded software or DLC you've purchased while the system is connected to the internet, even if you don't have the virtual game card loaded. For more information, please refer to details about the option on the system settings screen. And the long and short of this, from what I understand, is that as long as you are connected to the internet, even if the virtual game card is not loaded on your system and you are the primary owner of it, it does not have to be in that virtual game card format for you to necessarily play it, as long as you're connected online and connected to your correct Nintendo account. The Nintendo eShop and Nintendo Switch News icon colors on the home menu have been changed, and you will notice that as well. They do look different right now. Not really noticeably from a functionality standpoint that I could see anyway. I almost never open the news app, so I don't really remember what that was or what it looked like on the Switch beforehand, but just the icon itself for the eShop and the news have appeared to have changed. Multiple save data can be selected and transferred at once. Transfer your save data in the transfer your save data menu. So this is gearing up for things for the Switch 2, and this is some important stuff you'll want to know, especially if you are somebody who's potentially trading in your Nintendo Switch 1 console to a Switch 2. So system transfer to Nintendo Switch 2 has been added under the system settings, and then go to system and you can see it there. You can perform a system transfer from your Nintendo Switch to Nintendo Switch 2 using local communication. For users that will lose access, aka let's say you're going to trade in your Nintendo Switch to their Nintendo Switch before receiving their Nintendo Switch 2, there is an option to upload system transfer data to a dedicated server, which can then be retrieved on their Nintendo Switch 2. After you upload your system transfer data to the dedicated server, the Nintendo Switch system will be initialized to factory settings, so only perform this transfer if you'll be able to complete the transfer on Nintendo Switch 2. If you want to continue using your Nintendo Switch until you have a Nintendo Switch 2, we recommend completing the system transfer using local communication after you have acquired a Nintendo Switch 2 system. So AKA, if you are somebody who's trading in your system at GameStop, I know they're doing some kind of dedicated like they're gonna let you do your system console transfer before you actually trade in your system. But if you just want to be super prepared and trust in Nintendo servers, I'm sure, you know, I would say hopefully nothing can go wrong. Of course, that's not like guaranteed by any means, but if you were to do that system server upload option, you would be able to essentially offload all the data onto Nintendo's servers from your Switch 1 console. It's going to be factory reset after that's done either way. You then go to the store to actually trade in your console and get the credit towards the purchase of your Nintendo Switch 2, and then you're going to be able to basically boot up your Nintendo Switch 2, sign into that Nintendo account, and complete the rest of the transfer process, where Nintendo will download that information onto your Switch 2. So a nice option to have, at least if you are going to be in those positions of, you know, needing to basically complete that transfer before you have your console in your hands. Okay, so from here we have an internet connection, and Nintendo account is required to complete both local and server-based system transfer service. And then you have, for more information, see the system transfer to Switch 2 outline, which we will probably look out as well. I'm going to open that up in a new tab just in case if there's anything that's super relevant on that, and I will look through it ahead of time. So the appearance of some user icons have been updated, and then you have just kind of a few different disclaimers here. Note that the use of the primary console has been deprecated with the transition to virtual game cards, and pass-enabled console will be used instead. On a console set as the pass-enabled console, for a user, all users on the console can access certain subscriptions or passes for some software. For more information, see how to change the pass-enabled console on your Nintendo account. I'll have this exact website linked in the description down below, but all you need to know about that last portion is like your primary console function is basically being renamed pass-enabled console, meaning the primary console that owns that software, meaning you can lend out your games, or the virtual game card, which we now have to kind of go through this updated portion of information. So we really just need to hit the high points on this particular guide because there are a lot of detailed in and outs, but all you need to know is that you essentially, any games that you're going to share, this is Nintendo's like workaround for taking a physical game and handing it to your friend or family member and saying, here, you can borrow this game. That's essentially what this is. From the actual functionality of you being signed in to your own Nintendo account and playing it on your own system, digital games haven't really changed much, but you do have the ability now to lend out these games to other family members in your Nintendo Switch online ecosystem. It's local wireless, so if you do have family members on your plan that are in different states and stuff like this, that will really not apply unless if you can physically meet up, because literally local wireless is how you actually share these games. But you do have a whole new menu to kind of manage your entire games that you can kind of go through, and we'll probably show some b-roll of the video and stuff like that. But I really want to just highlight what most people are going to do with this feature, which is lending virtual game cards to family members. So just like with physical game cards, you can lend virtual game cards to other people. Keep in mind that you will not be able to play games that you lent out to other people, and you don't necessarily need to lend out games to share them. Any user on one of your consoles that can load virtual game cards can play any of your virtual game cards loaded to the console. So essentially, when you open up the virtual game card menu, there are going to be icons of your digital games, and they're either loaded on that console or they're not. If you're somebody that switches between multiple Nintendo Switch systems, you might have to load them on a specific console. But what they are saying here is that any user that hops onto your console that plays a digital game that you purchased, they're still able to do that without you lending it out to them, which is good, because I don't know that that was clarified before. It's not like Nintendo's shutting down the ability for other users that are signed into your console when you own a digital game. It doesn't stop them from playing it, but rather this is extra functionality where you can borrow it out to other family members that don't own that game. So there are some restrictions for lending virtual game cards. You and the borrower must have your consoles in proximity to each other to lend or borrow a virtual game card. The borrower must be part of your Nintendo account family group. And of course, that's like up to 8 different individuals can be a part of your family group. That is also how a lot of people make the cost of NSO expansion packs significantly cheaper. If you can find some friends and family to split it with, that's definitely a more cost-effective way to go about it. You can lend up to 3 virtual game cards at a time. The borrower can only borrow 1 game at a time. They cannot borrow games from multiple different people at once. So the borrower can only receive 1 game, not multiple. If you want to lend them all 3 to the same person, that's not possible, but you could lend it to 3 different accounts. But that borrower can also only receive 1 game at a time until they return their previous game. So you can lend 1 virtual game card at a time to a particular console, even if multiple family members have users on that console. You cannot lend a virtual game card to a console that has users on multiple different family groups on the console. And that one is interesting to me. So I think what that means is, like, if your user account is associated with a different Nintendo Switch Online membership than yours, let's say you have your own family group of 8 consoles, but you have a different user that's part of a different family group from an entirely separate 8 paid NSO membership subscription type of deal. I think that that's what that's referencing, is saying you can't lend it out people who have multiple, so that way they can't receive multiple games being lent, I'm assuming. But then you said when you do lend a game, any DLC you have purchased is also lent. Virtual game cards can be lent to a family member for 14 days, after which they are automatically returned and can be lent out again. Borrower can return them early if they are done playing. You can also retrieve them early if necessary. And you do have the option just to go in there and essentially pull the game back early, or they can just send it back to you and return it early. So that's kind of the in and out, and probably the main things of what you need to know about the virtual game card situation on and how it works on Nintendo Switch. But those are the big updates. Now, system transfer stuff, just to reiterate, if you are getting ready to get a Switch 2, do not do the server transfer option. Right now it says servers undergoing maintenance whenever I try to click it, but don't just offload all your Nintendo Switch data until you are like right before you're ready to trade it in, if that's how you're going to go about doing that. But if you are keeping your current console, it's now just a pretty easy process to basically, build in your save data and transfer it over to your new console through local wireless. And it seems like most all of this stuff, as you just mess around with it and actually use these features, it's pretty self-explanatory. Nintendo does a lot of the ins and outs and tries to almost over-explain any of the questions, but at the end of the day, this is going to be a decently easy thing to achieve when it comes to these new features on and utilizing them on Nintendo Switch 1, and then also how it's going to interact with Switch 2. And the thing we can't really see hands-on or, really test at this point is that game share functionality, because you have to have a Nintendo Switch 2 to actually mess with that at all. But let me know what you think of all of this in the comments down below. The last big major Nintendo Switch 1 update, it seems, for the current family of consoles being 20.0.0 and the new feature set that comes from this. Are you excited for things like virtual game cards and Nintendo's kind of witty idea that they came up with to make digital games more shareable in a way? Do you see any drawbacks from this firmware so far in the virtual game card system? What do you think about the system transfer process from Nintendo Switch 1 to Nintendo Switch 2? Is that something that you will be undergoing, especially if you are somebody who's transferring in or trading in your system at something like GameStop? And how do you feel about seeing new icons on your Switch 1 home screen after all these years? Because I know that that's definitely thrown me off now, as I've booted into it a couple times since this update dropped. But make sure you share all your thoughts and feelings in the comments down below before you leave, regardless if we agree or disagree. Also, make sure you like, subscribe, turn your notification bell. And with that, I've been Sunbro, you've been Nation. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.